This is a short video on how to install your bike computer on your bicycle. The first thing you want to do is pull out the instructions, and this will give you a lot of information on how to install and use your bike computer. So go through this first, it'll answer a lot of questions. Now we're going to install the handlebar mount onto the handlebar. This is the handlebar mount. There's a tab that faces the rider, and this is the back side of the mount. You want to get 2 zip ties and feed them into the back of the mount like this. That's one. This is the second one. And note the orientation of the tabs. So these are great little zip ties. If you accidentally put them in the wrong place, there's a little tab here that you can pull down and it will unlock the zip tie and you can remove them. And now decide where you want to put it on the handlebars. You can put it on the left side or the right side. We're going to put it on the left side. So zip up the zip ties. That's 1. That is 2. And try to get the alignment of the zip tie, of the mount and zip tie, something like this. So you want the mount to face a little bit towards the rider, so when he's looking down he can see the computer. And tighten up the zip ties. And it works best if you put the zip ties, the heads kind of against the handlebar and not too far up here until after you cut it. So you put it here, tighten up, get your pliers, and give the zip tie nice yanks. You hear more clicks. There you go, and that's very secure. It's not going to go anywhere. And at this point, I'm going to cut off the zip ties, something like this, and that. And I also cut off the little tabs so you don't accidentally disengage the zip ties. And what I'd like to do is to make it nice and neat, I actually push the head afterwards up into the handlebar mount, something like this. So it's kind of nice and tidy. It's very secure. It's not going anywhere. To install the bike computer onto the handlebar mount, it's very easy. You take the computer, and from the front side you take it and you slide it into the slots. To remove it, you press the front tab and you slide it out. So now we're going to put the speed sensor on to the bicycle, and you have 2 options. You can put it onto the front fork or you put it onto the rear seat stay triangle. But for this part, we're going to actually we decided to put it onto the front fork, and later we'll show it on the rear triangle. When deciding where to put the speed sensor, either on the front wheel or the rear wheel, one consideration is if you're going to use your bicycle on an indoor trainer. And typically indoor trainers, the bike is mounted to the trainer near the rear wheel area, and the rear wheel spins and the front wheel stays stationary. So keep that in mind when deciding where to put the speed sensor. One of the things you want to take into consideration is the distance between the magnet and the sensor when it's mounted. And you can put the sensor anywhere along the front surface, but we find it fits better, especially for road bikes, a little higher up, since there's a little more clearance between the sensor and the spoke higher up, since the spokes angle inwards. If you put it too low, you might not have enough clearance between the spoke, the magnet, and the fork or sensor, so it's usually better to put it a little higher up. So we're going to mount it right about here, and the magnet is going to go right about here. So now we're going to install the magnet for the speed sensor on a spoke. Very easy to do. There's two parts on the magnet, a round part that screws into the base. And on the base there are two sections where you can attach a spoke. On one side it's flat and the other side has a semicircle which would go on round spokes. So the flat side on bladed or flat spokes, round side on round spokes. And we have round spokes, so we're going to mount it to this side. And you want to make sure you pick a spoke that's on the same side as the fork. So spokes go from the rim to the hub, and there's a left and right side to the hub. You want to make sure it's on the same side as where you're going to mount the sensor to. And since we're doing it on the left side, we're going to pick a spoke that goes to the left hub, to the left side of the hub. And you just unscrew it a bit. Oops, a little bit more. And then you just kind of pop it on and then tighten it up. And we're just going to place it right about here. We're going to keep it loose so we can adjust it later. And that's how you install the magnet onto a spoke. Now we're going to take the speed sensor and make sure it says speed and not cadence, since they're two different sensors. And then we're going to put the zip ties into the two little slots at the bottom. And the orientation of the zip ties heads should be something of the sort. So when you kind of lace them together, it will be more like this. Sometimes the zip ties kind of curl the wrong way, so you want to make sure you put it in correctly. Now you take the sensor and you're going to put the circle arrow and the speed text towards the spoke, so they face inwards. And we're going to orientate it right about here, and we're going to zip lock one of them in loosely, not too tight. And we're going to do the second one, so like this, and we're going to put it, make sure there's no, the brake is not touching the sensor, and we're going to put it pretty high so there's a little more clearance. On my fork, it needs a little more clearance between the sensor and the magnet, so we have to put it a little higher, and we're going to angle it in. And we're going to take a look at the position of the magnet and the sensor, and you want the magnet to pass over the screen printing of the circle arrow. And it's right about there, so that looks pretty good. And the clearance, you can take a look, if you look forwards this way, you kind of see how it sits on there. We're going to tighten this up a little bit more, and the magnet doesn't touch the body of the sensor, nor does it touch the fork or anything, so there's nice clearance there. We picked a good position for our sensor, but if you put it down lower, if you mounted the sensor a little bit lower, there might not be enough clearance between the fork and the magnet because the spokes angle inwards. So you have to play with that a little bit depending on your fork and spoke geometry. So just keep that in mind. So we're pretty good here. It seems like the distance between the magnet and the circle arrow is about 2 or 3 millimeters, and that's pretty good. We'll just angle it. We're not going to fine adjust it yet until we're happy with everything. We're just going to loosely put it here for now. So that's how you put the speed sensor and magnet onto the front fork of your bicycle. So now we're just going to clean up the speed sensor, cut off the cables, but first we're going to get our pliers and tighten up the cables. Make sure they're nice and tight. There's a couple clicks there. And then this one, again, a couple more clicks. That looks pretty good. I'm going to push those in just a little bit. And then I'm going to get my cable cutters and cut them off. And I'm also cutting off the little tabs, the release tabs, so we don't accidentally loosen up the zip ties. Now let me check the alignment one more time. I moved it a little bit, so let me just push that in a bit more. Okay, and that looks pretty good. And now we're going to test out the alignment between the sensor and the magnet. It's pretty easy. Just pull out the computer and turn it on. And then basically you just want to pass the magnet back and forth by the sensor. And as you can see in the second line here, we're getting a speed reading. So the alignment is good. Double check to make sure the magnet is very tight. And this is just another point of view looking from the right hand side of the bike through the wheels towards the speed sensor inner surface, and that's the magnet. This is a speed sensor, and as you can see the circle arrows here, and if we move the magnet past it, you can see the magnet is properly in line with the circle arrow. So that's what you want. You want this magnet to pass by the circle arrow. And there you go. It's the speed sensor is installed on the bike. Now we're going to install the speed sensor on the rear triangle of the bicycle. Now we talked about before, you guys put it on the front fork or the rear triangle. So we've uninstalled it from the fork, and now we're going to install it here just to show you your option and how to install it on the rear triangle. And it's going to be very similar to how you did it on the front fork. The placement will be on the seat stay, and the sensor will be mounted on the rear triangle of the bicycle. And we're going to install it probably here somewhere, and that looks good, and the magnet will go on one of the spokes here. So let's put the magnet on first, and it's very similar to how you installed it on the front wheel. So we're going to put it right about here, screw it, pop it on, tighten it down, and not too tight, so we can move it around a little bit. So now we're going to install the zip ties, the two large zip ties, onto the speed sensor. Very similar to how we did it before. Feed the zip ties through the slots on the side with the screening of the speed and circle arrow. And of course, note the orientation of the zip ties. It should go something like this, where the heads of the ties are oriented like this, and they lock in like this. Oops, like that. So something of the sort. Okay, so once again, the screening will face inwards. So the speed text and the circle arrow faces the wheel and spokes. And we're going to put it right around here. We're going to loosely put it on. That's one. That's two. We didn't catch any spokes with the zip ties. The sensor and magnet go right about there. That looks pretty good. We like that. So we're going to tighten these up a little bit more, and we're going to put the heads kind of towards the back of the bicycle. And let's see, now we're going to kind of roughly adjust it, kind of like that. It seems to be pretty good. We'll move the spoke a little, the magnet a little bit, so it faces the circle arrow. And we kind of like that. I'm going to tighten this down a little bit more. So that looks pretty good. and the distance is pretty good. Let me get my pliers and give that a nice yank. A couple clicks, and this one, a couple clicks, and I twisted it out. So let's just rotate that again some more, and that looks pretty good. Now what you can do is get the computer head, turn it on, and move the magnet, so move the wheel back and forth a little bit so the magnet passes over the circle arrow, and you can see that we have a reading on the computer, so the alignment is good. So that looks good. Now we're going to cut off the, well, I'm going to tighten them down a little bit more just to make sure it's good. That's one. That's two is good, and then we're going to snip them off. One. That's two. That's good. I'm going to push these over a little bit inwards and then twist that back. I need to tighten this down so it doesn't slide or twist. And you tighten it down quite a bit, but not too much to strip it. And that looks pretty good. Let's check that again. So there you go, we're getting a reading. And the alignment of the sensor and magnet look pretty good. So we're good to go. So here is a view of the speed sensor attached to the rear triangle, and the magnet is here from looking from the right side through the wheel to the left side. And as you can see, the magnet and circle arrow on the sensor are aligned very nicely. So you twist it, the magnet is passing by the circle arrow. And to check one more time, we could hold the, let's see now, where can we put this so you can see it? Here. So you can see if we do this, we are getting a speed reading. So the alignment is good for the magnet and speed sensor. And now we're going to install the cadence magnet onto the crank. And for the cadence sensor and the magnet, you're going to put it onto the left side of the bicycle. And so on the left crank, and it goes onto the inner surface, so the surface between the crank and the bicycle. And it's pretty easy, it's just a magnet. You take a big zip tie, you feed it through the slot on the magnet, and you put it on here. There's also a little adhesive sticker. You could take that off, just take off the white paper, like this, with your fingernail or something, and just peel it off, and oops, there we go, something like that. So we're going to put the zip tie, and we're going to have the zip tie head kind of back here somewhere. So we're going to put it like this, put it on, flip that around, and twist this kind of like that. And we're just going to tighten it up and kind of put it, there's a lot of different geometries for cranks. Some get wide and tapered, and some are squared. So just put it, make sure you put it in this place that's pretty stable, where the zip tie won't slide around, the magnet and zip tie won't slide around. So you don't want to put it on a wide part. If it gets more narrow, you want to put it on probably the narrowest area of the crank, and you want to put it closer to the pedal. So it's on there now. It looks pretty good. we'll come back and clip off the zip tie later on. So here is another view from the right side looking inwards towards the bike, towards the left side of the inside surface of the crank. And here's the cadence magnet, the zip tie, and the crank. And this is kind of the orientation. As you see, this is pretty stable. It's not going to move too much. Some cranks have holes and kind of like a hollow area in here, and you might have to put a piece of tape or some foam or something in behind here to keep the magnet from moving around. You want the magnet to be pushed up against something. So, but in our case, it works quite nicely, and we're going to leave it like this. So here's an example of a cadence magnet mounted on a crank with a hollow tube at the back. What we ended up doing was finding a big chunk of foam, cutting a piece out of it, and then putting it between the magnet and the crank, and now it's very stable. It's not going anywhere. So if you have this type of crank, you might have to do something of the sort. But it's very important that the magnet, the cadence magnet, doesn't move around, or you may have problems with getting a signal from the cadence sensor to the computer. Now we're going to attach the cadence sensor to the bicycle, and the location of the cadence sensor will go on your chainstay, and now the position will be determined more by where your cadence magnet is on your crank. And once again, the circle arrow and the magnet should be aligned. So for the cadence sensor, the circle arrow will actually, and the circle arrow and the cadence text will actually face outwards, so you can have your cadence magnet pass by the circle arrow. And this looks pretty good. So you want to put the zip ties on, just like we did for the speed sensor. And I'm going to just loosely fit it on, something like this. That's one, that's two, and there we go. And let's point these down a little bit for now, get them out of the way. And so, oops, so I loosen these up a little bit. I position it right. So I'm gonna slide this over. There we go. And let's come over a little bit more. So just a little bit more, right about there. And let's see how that looks. Okay, so now the magnet and the circle arrow are aligned nicely, and I'm going to tighten this up a little bit more, but not completely. That's one, that's two, and I'm going to curl these up so they just kind of point downwards and don't make noises in the spoke. And I'll curl that way so it doesn't get in the way too much. So you spin it. It's touching now. There we go. So something of the sort. So now we're going to show you how to test out the alignment of the cadence sensor and the cadence magnet. So just pull out the computer, turn it on, and simply just pass the crank and the magnet over the circle arrow like this, and you will see if your alignment is good, you'll actually get a cadence reading like we are getting now. So the alignment is good. Now that we know the alignment of the cadence sensor and magnet is okay, let's go ahead and clip off the zip ties, but first tighten them up. Pliers, of course, give it a good yank. Make sure it's nice and secure. It's looking pretty good. I like that. So that's the magnet is tight. And I'll get the clippers and clip off. There we go. So it's all clipped off. Now let's do the same thing for these. Actually, just a little bit. So same thing. Get some pliers. Pull the zip ties nice and tight. I'm going to want to tuck these actually underneath a little bit so they're not in the way. Clean it up. So let's twist them down and give it another bit of a pull. That's pretty good. Get out the cutters and cut them off. And of course, I'm taking off the little tabs also, the release tabs, so we don't accidentally loosen them up. So that's good. So let's check out the alignment again by passing that back and forth, and we're getting a value, so that's good. So the alignment of the magnet and the cadence sensor is good. And that concludes our video on how to install the bike computer on a bicycle.